Okay, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Assalamu alaikum, Sister Claire.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
And assalamu alaikum to those who are joining us live. We're focusing on nurturing spirituality development during this segment. But before we get started, Sister, can I please introduce you? Just a quick introduction, if that's okay?
Thank you.
Okay. So Sister Claire Alkouatli is currently a doctoral student in the human development learning and culture at the University of British Columbia. Her research focuses on the role of educators and pedagogies in sites of Islamic education as related to cognitive, social, emotional, and spiritual development. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much.
Okay, I'm very excited to have you. So if we can get started on defining what spiritual development is and if it differs to religious education.
So, in the literature on religious and spiritual development, there are clear definitions that people have struggled to come up with over time to define how is spirituality different from religion. And in generally speaking, the two are distinct, but they're related. So one can have a spiritual experience outside of a religious framework. One can also be religious without having a deeply spiritual. But generally speaking, spirituality is defined as one's connection with something transcendent to oneself, whereas religion refers to the spiritual practices and rituals that people do in order to nurture that relationship. So what I would like to do, given that we're speaking in a context of Islamic education, is to talk about spirituality from an Islamic perspective, which to my mind refers to consciousness of God. In Arabic is taqwa. So when one speaks about spirituality, I refer that to taqwa because as we deepen our connection and awareness with God, we deepen our consciousness, our spiritual consciousness.
Okay, so obviously this is a huge component in Islam, and within Islamic schools, do you see that concept of taqwa being effectively brought into the classroom or into the school environment from your research?
So I suppose, yeah, I mean, my research was done in an informal mosque school in Canada, and one thing that came out of that research is that the religious practices of Islam are intended to deepen Islamic expressions and experiences of taqwa. So everything we do, from our social etiquette practices, do we making sure that we take care of those who are our responsibility, the acts of worship that we do, all of these are intended to bring us closer to God and to deepen that conscious awareness. The problem that I saw in my research site and that I've seen in the research literature and that I've heard of anecdotally is that these practices are often taught without a clear connection to the development of taqwa or God consciousness or love of God. So many times these things are taught and it's almost like we've forgotten what is the main purpose of these. So rather than speaking specifically about what's going on, particularly in Islamic schools, which varies widely around the world, and which is what's so amazing about our ummah, is that we have this global community. So what's happening in classrooms in Australia or Malaysia or Canada or Lebanon will be different. So instead, I'd like to actually talk about how individual educators can nurture the development of taqwa in students.
Okay, yes, please. So what would that look like?
Okay, so I spoke earlier about this dialectic between actions and consciousness. This is actually something that's within the human development literature. So our practices and what we do shape the way that we think, and the way that we think, in turn, shapes our practices. So if you want to think about this in terms of taqwa, you can look at it like this. The practices that we do, especially when we do them with Islam, Iman, and Ihsan, serve to deepen our taqwa. And when the deeper our taqwa is, the more refined and beautiful our actions. So I look at it like a positive feedback loop between taqwa and Ihsan. This is happening. This is, in a way, for me, the core of Islamic education is how can we refine our practices, not just to be the best Quran reciter or the best faster or the best prayer, but how can we actually refine those in order to deepen our taqwa? And I love this verse in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, we created you into tribes and nations so that you can know one another. And the most righteous among you are those who are the most conscious of God. And the word used there is taqwa. So it's really at the heart of our human existence.
So it sounds very similar to the loop of Elam and Amal. Am I on the right track, or is it much deeper than that? Obviously,
Yes,
it's deeper than that.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, Ilm tends to refer to knowledge in terms of a cognitive sense. And taqwa is a more expansive concept that includes consciousness as encompassing cognitive and emotional, embodied and spiritual. All of it together is consciousness. So that's why taqwa is, ilm is a part of it, but taqwa is broader and deeper. So in terms of fostering this feedback loop, the model that I proposed that you posted, I just want to say, first of all, that it's a work in progress. It's based on, yes.
Just to interrupt, for those who are just joining in and perhaps they haven't seen the notification, if you do want to see the model, just click into the comment that I've posted on the event post, and you can have a view of it now while Sister Claire elaborates further into that.
Yes. So this is a preliminary model that's based on some conceptual literature on Islamic education, and it's also based on some empirical research, the few studies that have been done empirically on pedagogy in Islamic education. There's some of those, and some of those scholars coming out of Australia, which is very exciting. But not too much has been done on pedagogy in Islamic education. Nadim Memon is also working on that front. So it's a new and cutting edge. It's one that's very exciting, and it's exciting because it may be one of the more flexible aspects of Islamic education, and also the one that has the most potential in a way to promote growth that we can do humanly as educators, right? Because there's a whole divine aspect there that we really don't have control over. One individual's relationship with God is their own. Yeah.
That's
so
right.
as educators,
we still have that amana.
Yes, we have the amana, and and we can function at the level of pedagogy, of methods of teaching and learning. So when you look at, so the model is based on these conceptual and empirical sources, but it's a work in progress. So please, nobody, reference it or do anything like that. Further research is needed. Okay, so you have the positive feedback, this positive feedback loop, and you have the child in the middle of that loop. You have that child's own relationship and destiny with Allah, which is with Allah. Then you have that child situated within an Islamic context. So on the left side of the picture, I have the Islamic context. This is all of the child's exposure to Islamic practices, who his or her role models are, what kind of Islam, what interpretations of Islam, the meaning the child makes of it. So that too is in a way sort of out of our control as educators.
Okay, so that would obviously entail the many contexts that that child is part of. So not only school, but home environment, the environment out of home and school, various contexts, which I guess is all Islamic through our worldview.
Absolutely. So that also includes the sort of non-Islamic context that the child is interfacing with, and how those are described to the child by the parents as being Islamic, non-Islamic. What do we do with this? What do we not do with this? Yeah. So this can be considered like the child's life context. And then you have this other layer, which are the adults. So down on the bottom, you see like two adults there.
Yep.
Could be parents, could be educators. Those adults who are actually working with the child on their Islamic education. And from there's a lot that those two parents can do in terms of nurturing taqwa. So do you want me to just keep going on through it?
Yep.
Okay, so I picked, I mean, there's many things a person can do, but the reason I picked these three things, I picked relationships, engaging in things together as an adult and a child together, and the third was mediation. So I chose these three things not only because they feature in the literature on human development, but they are clear within the prophetic sunnah and sirah. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, relationships between the educator and the student, real relationships, warm, loving relationships. You know the child, you know what they like, you know what they did on the weekend, you know their quirks, and that allows you to teach in ways that are most meaningful to that child. So it also means that teaching is not the same. The Islamic teaching is not the same for every child and every adult dyad. Like it's different
Yeah.
depending on who those people are.
And we
So
know that the Prophet
relationships.
ﷺ, sorry, and we know that the Prophet ﷺ differentiated his approach towards his companions depending on their temperaments and traits. I just a quick question though in regards to the term that you use to mediate, because
Yeah.
often at times it's associated with something negative. So it's when an issue arises and then the adults come in to mediate, but you're not referring to that at all, right?
I'm not referring to that. No, not at all. That would just be one example of a time where mediation is
Yeah.
appropriate. Mediation is essentially the adult making visible to the child an Islamic conceptual system. So, for example, pointing out in the most mundane moments, oh, look, this is what Allah meant when He asked us not to do this. Or, oh, subhanallah, look at that baby bird and its mother. This is rahmah from Allah. You know, so
Yeah.
it can be positive, it can be negative, but it's really important for a child to go through life with an Islamic lens. So rather than only teaching Islam in a classroom and again, sort of practices disconnected from the child's life, mediation is about the interface between the educator and the child and making visible an Islamic perspective on everything. And yeah.
You've just reminded me of an example. Last term, when Sheikh Anthony came to our school, focusing on permaculture, and he was discussing the importance of the worm farm and the importance of the worm. And subhanAllah, the way he was able to link the concept of the worm and the cycle and why we need it to Tawheed. And it was just so powerful, and the students were able to really conceptualize what Tawheed is through that example. So I think something along those lines really encapsulates what you're referring to. Am I right?
So, subhanallah, that example is profound for me because it also illustrates something else. He, in that situation, was an educator, and you were a learner.
Yes.
And the situation that he created there, the educational situation that he created, allowed you to have an insight that may have even transcended the minutia of what he was trying to teach, and it allowed you to actually connect with Allah as the educator, as al-Rabb, like the nurturer, right? The one, or the one who gives us insight, the one who gives us flashes of knowledge in our being. So that's exactly what I'm talking about. He mediated that for you, but it sounds like he had a relationship with you guys as learners, and he also he was doing something with you. You were doing something together. He wasn't just sort of reading monotonously from a book. It sounds like you guys actually may have had something tangible. Right. So all of these three things overlap, and they do. The purpose is exactly what you just suggested, which is that the learner herself has an insight that's bigger
Okay.
and deeper than the moment at hand.
So
Yes.
then, having said that, though, Sheikh Anthony obviously would be able to do so much easier than what I could, because I'm still learning with my learners. I don't know, and I wouldn't know how to articulate myself. Yeah, like Sheikh.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? So how then, as educators, do we prepare ourselves for our students?
Okay. There's so many nuances to that question, but I just want to mention something else. Is that one thing that this brought to mind is that you as a learner having an insight in that moment, you sharing that with Sheikh Anthony would be educative for him. So we as educators are never finished learning. And this is what's so beautiful about the deen is, subhanAllah, it's so deep. The learning continues forever. And unlike other perspectives on human development, there's no end point to our development because it ends in this loop of taqwa and ihsan. I mean, okay, again, this is my own perspective. I don't want to say this as anything, but just go with me for a minute. This loop is not an end point to development. It's an ongoing spiral that goes on and on and on and on, and we can never perfect it because only Allah knows everything, and only Allah is perfect. So we're always growing and learning. And I think that's what's so beautiful about mediation is that sometimes you'll be engaged with it, and with the relationships too. You'll be engaged with students and they will say something to you that is absolutely striking. One time I was working with a child. I think we had just finished prayer and we were doing dua. And he looked down at the rug and it was covered with tiny little dots. Like the design of the rug was many, many dots of white on the inside and a small fringe of black on the outside dots. And he looked at it and he said, look at this. He said, all of those white dots are like all of the goodness in me. And the black dots are like those little dots of darkness that I need, the dirty part of me or whatever.
What a
SubhanAllah.
reflection.
And it was, yeah, it really, and it wasn't related to, and like, of course it was related, but it wasn't directly related to the moment at hand. But it was that moment where a child's insight is so meaningful, and it affects the educator as well. So this is what I also love about Islamic education is that we are constantly learning with our students. They're constantly teaching us things. And the more an educator has that perspective, the more they're going to engage in deeper learning with the children and promote the children's meaning making of their own, on their own.
Yeah, I agree. SubhanAllah. Thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, so then having said that, at times I hear educators, and I'm sure a lot of us have, where comments are made such as, you know, we can try and instill all these values and perspectives at school. However, if these values aren't shared in the home environment, then it's futile. What's your opinion on this?
Right. Well, as a convert to Islam, I didn't have an Islamic home environment. I had some amazing things in my home environment that really nurtured human development, including moral development. Yep. But it was individual moments with people over time that flipped my heart to Islam. So the power that an Islamic educator has in teaching the deen with children is immensely powerful, and a child does not need to be in an Islamic environment 24/7. And in this world, it's very difficult. Even if you create the most Islamic home you can, there's so much going on that takes us away from the deen. Yet to have role models that a child is emotionally connected to and cognitively stimulated by, who presents Islam in the most intelligent and beautiful way, is transformative. And it doesn't have to be every day. It can be something the teacher says. It can be something another student in class says. And that's also goes back to your point about the fact that teachers are educators with their students, is what kind of learning environment can we create together so that we all have insights and we all learn together.
Yeah. And, you know, time is a factor as well. It takes time to build rapport with students. It takes time to build trust. So we have to be open to that, and we have to remind ourselves of that and have patience. And I think you hit the key word here, model, to be a model. And I think you're right in saying that we can have that impact. Sometimes it takes just one person to have a strong impact in your personal life. So we can definitely be that person for our students, inshallah.
Yes, inshallah. But it goes also back to something that you said, is that how we develop ourselves as educators is crucial, because now this goes to the bottom of my diagram, which is a sort of like upside down triangle, and the end point is Allah. I saw this once, and I wish I could reference. Inshallah, I'll try to find the reference and post it on the group. But it was actually talking about a husband and a wife. And as they each on their own trajectory get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they become closer to each other. So I was thinking about this in terms of the educator and the child relationship, is that as the educator herself or himself moves closer to Allah, they become closer to the child, and they together become closer to Allah. So we need to constantly be working on our own taqwa, because
Yes.
the more awake we are, the more we can awaken others. And this is a fundamental point about the Prophet ﷺ, his teachings. Transmission is a word that is used, and it's so fascinating because it's very difficult to find in the literature on human development at all. But this idea that when you spend time with somebody of a higher consciousness level, with higher taqwa, your taqwa raises. It happens. They bring you up. SubhanAllah. I mean, the most mundane example I can think about is that if you're playing tennis with a better tennis player, your game is going to get better for the moments you're playing with that person, and maybe forever. But it's not the
Yeah.
same as taqwa.
Okay, yeah, I can see that in my personal life. When I attend perhaps a religious scripture for my own personal growth, I'm always thinking of all these ways that I could possibly implement everything back into the classroom, because it so relates to all of us and our children, regardless of age. So
Absolutely.
I definitely agree with you. And I find that when I do learn something, it's something that I want to take back and share with my kids, and have that growth with them.
Right. And that's something else too, is that I think sometimes as Muslim educators, we worry that something is going to be beyond the child's comprehension. It doesn't matter. We still need to share it, because whatever the child takes from it in their own way is something, or they may understand it later. So once when I was not a Muslim, I I was traveling in Jerusalem, and I was in a hotel, and the roof of the hotel had a view onto the Haram al-Sharif, the Masjid al-Aqsa. And it was my plane got in the middle of the night, and I came in the middle of the night into this hotel, and one of the and I said out loud, why do I feel drawn to Muslim countries? Okay, I said this as a traveler, and she said, because your heart is Muslim. And at the
SubhanAllah.
time, I didn't know what that meant at all, but something about it felt good to me. Something felt good. And only later did I realize what she meant is that we're all born on the fitrah.
Yes.
So a concept like fitrah only came to me later on when I understood the context.
However, you still were able to reflect back on that experience, recall that experience. So perhaps it was something that you didn't understand what she meant then. So she's just cut off, but inshallah she'll be able to log back into this link. Just give it time. So we'll just give it another minute and see if Sister Claire can log back in. And thank you for your patience. Alhamdulillah, she's logging back in. It's managed to work.
I'm here.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam. Did
Sorry
we
about
lose our
that.
connection?
We just for a short period of time, and somebody
Okay.
said it gives us time to reflect and absorb, so that's okay.
Okay. But I don't know where it cut off though.
That's okay. Let's
Okay.
continue. Sorry.
Okay.
So I think a key concept here is also muhasabah, self-reflection. Would you agree?
Yes, because um, reflection in general, whether you're reflecting on the signs of Allah, on the inside of yourself, or on the farthest horizons, reflection definitely is critical, and self-reflection more so, including, because you can, I mean, in the literature, there is mention of the fact that taqwa can be considered like an internal sort of X-ray of yourself. So the more taqwa you have, the more accurately you may be able to identify your weaknesses and your mistakes. Still, we still pray that Allah forgives us the mistakes we don't know about, because we can't see everything. But yes, absolutely, this is one too. And when an educator would share that with a child, a self-reflection and a self-criticism, this is incredibly powerful too. And it's moving away from the model of educators as knowing everything and children as knowing nothing, which is an old school way of approaching the classroom. And it could even be a colonial, like have a colonial root. I mean, it definitely does in some circumstances. Yeah. But this idea that we should model with the children where we aren't seeing something or where we made a mistake, and share with that. We're humans.
Okay, so having said all that, then would it be, in order to do so in a responsive manner, would you teach particular aspects very explicitly? So allocate time to teach aspects explicitly, and then be able to infuse it throughout all your learning experiences? You know, teaching the skill to mediate and you know, social skills and your expectations and the students' expectations, what they can bring. What would you do
I mean,
in a class setting?
Well, first of all, I mean, we just mentioned that Islam is incredibly deep and expansive. And yet there are some core principles that can be reiterated again and again, and come up all the time. In terms of mediation, for children to be able to see those principles made visible in tangible reality. So one example that I have is one day a child witnessed another child stealing gum out of a third child's bag. And this is an amazing moment. And then the child came to the teacher and mentioned that he saw this. And the teacher didn't sort of come down heavy-handed on the whole thing. The teacher suggested to the child who witnessed, maybe you should go to the one who stole it and go directly to him and remind him that this isn't optimal behavior. And so he did. So this kind of example, but to be able to say this from an Islamic perspective without the teacher sort of taking it into her own hands and sort of heavy-handedly solving the whole problem, or you also don't necessarily want to create an awareness of Allah without this idea that Allah is like watching you to catch your mistakes and punish you. We don't ever want to go from the negative perspective in terms of that. I mean, there's definitely negative things that we can gently bring into our teaching, but I think this is what I mean about mediating in an ongoing fashion, because these opportunities arise all the time for us to work out Islamic principles with children.
Yeah, that's right. The opportunities that the day presents to you.
Right, all day long. But the other important part about this is actually hearing from the children how they're making sense of their own mediation too. So that's why dialogue is under the middle one about engagement, because it's speaking together, acting together, participating together, inquiring together. There's this amazing quote in the human development literature about, if we want children to learn to think, we need to think together with them, adults and children together. So I suppose also that this perspective is, rather than being a child-focused perspective or a teacher-focused perspective, it's really about the interaction between the two and the relationship between the two together. Yeah. So having dialogue, open-ended dialogue with the children, where, so you asked about reiterating things or mediating things over and over again. Noticing things that happen in the moment, using teachable moments when, say, for example, the class is given a gift. This happened in my site of research. The class was given a gift of donuts. and nobody knew who had given the donuts. And so the teacher, before they opened the box, and the kids were just like dying to rip open the box, she went through this whole thinking process about what do we do when we receive a gift from somebody and we don't know who it is. And kids gave different answers. We say alhamdulillah, we say shukran, we say thank you. And then she said, let's do a dua for the person who gave us this. And so all of the children did this dua to the anonymous giver. And it was an amazing teachable moment of Islamic adab and the power of dua also. And the fact that dua is so much between you and Allah. The person didn't even need to be there to hear the dua, and they were going to benefit from your dua. So these are examples of what I mean about seizing moments. This educator was really on, like switched on, and she immediately seized that moment. Yeah. And so then you can, when you get together in these dialogic circles, like halakha, which is what Farah Ahmed studies as a pedagogy, as a tool of,
So that's what I was referring to, taking the time out to also have explicit circle time.
Yes.
Yeah.
So amazing. Yes. Important. And for it to be open-ended, for it not to be sort of, the teacher asks a question, the children respond, the teacher evaluates, not this triadic sequence, but for it to be open-ended and also to hear what the children are interested in talking about, what's meaningful to their lives. Really amazing. Then they're engaged, they're interested. Oh, now you're talking about things, even if those topics are difficult and even if we don't know the answers all the time.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing, subhanAllah, so many points that we need to reflect on, and I'm looking forward to even listening again to this interview and picking up on all the points that you've shared with us. Any last words before we end the session?
Jazakum Allah khair for the participating, starting this, making it happen. Inshallah, I hope that we all can benefit from it over time. Thank you so much.
Assalamu alaikum, Sister Claire.
Wa alaikum salam.